Hello, my name is Josie Pendleton, and today I will be talking about my research in fostering a sense of community in a rural town, the role of college athletics. I and my advisor, Dr. Martin, have been doing this, and we are from Radford University, and I am a senior in sport management program. The background for this research. So in my time in college, I felt many different things in regard to feeling of belonging, thus driving me to seek out research for what was different between schools of different sizes and locations. This study began as an attempt to discover what makes a sense of community different between a small school in a rural town versus a larger school. With this study, insight on the viewpoint of college athletics can be gained, which is important for people working in college athletics to recognize for areas of improvement. This research was specifically important to me because I did consider going to a larger school, but opted going for a smaller town school. Therefore, being able to see the sense of community created in that was important to me. So the review of literature. The literature found for this research on sense of community largely involved large Division I schools with a football program. The reading showed that the available research is extensively focused around students, student athletes, or community members. However, none included all of the groups, exacting as one large populous group. A sense of community scale has been established to measure how sense of community can be built through sport. However, the scale is largely used for athletes. The sense of community scale. This research was conducted based off the Warner Sense of Community in Sports scale. The scale has 6 different dimensions of community. First is administrative consideration. Administrative consideration is the expression of core concern and intentionality of administrators. Second is common interest. Common interest is group dynamics, social networking, and friendships that result from individuals being brought together by common interest. Third is competitions. Competition is the challenge to excel against both internal and external rivalries. Fourth is equity of administrative decisions. Equity of administrative decisions is decisions that demonstrate all community members are treated equal. Fifth is leadership opportunities. Leadership opportunities is informal and formal opportunities to guide and direct others in the community. Sixth and finally is social spaces. Social spaces is a common area or facility in which athletes could interact with one another. The statement of purpose. The purpose of this study was to examine how college athletics foster a sense of community among non-student athlete college students, student athletes, employees of the athletic program, and community members in a rural town setting through the 6-dimension sense of community in sports scale. The methodology used for this research was that 12 participants were selected from different stakeholder groups. 3 different individuals were selected from the following groups: 1, local community members, 2, student athletes, 3, non-student athletes, and 4, athletic department staff. Each participant participated in a semi-structured interview, each lasting around 30 minutes, with a series of standard questions followed by any probing questions in order to delve deeper. The 3-step deductive coding process in which 2 researchers independently analyzed each interview was used. There is currently a gap in literature with the lack of inclusivity of research groups, so this research is inclusive of groups like non-student athletes. The results section. We wanted to discover if the athletic department was fostering a sense of community among our various stakeholder groups. So the results of this study were found through coding based on the factors of the sense of community in sports scale. Those factors were administrative consideration, common interest, competition, equity and administrative decisions, leadership, and social spaces. The first factor is administrative considerations. Community outreach was discussed by all 4 stakeholder groups about how the athletic department's efforts to engage the community through outreach help connect people to the athletic department and to each other. An example of that we have is, I know that they do now, as of the last 2 years, they do a volunteer thing They have a volunteer day. Men's and women's basketball is like they go and they read to students or something like that. So I know that's one outreach thing that they do. This was said by a community member. Next is ticket prices, which was discussed by some stakeholder groups about the intentionality of keeping the prices reasonable by our athletic department, no matter the success of the teams. The quote we have is, "I think in terms of kind of our ticket pricing, I think we've done a good job of keeping it pretty reasonable, especially with the success we've had recently." This was said by a member of the athletic department staff. Lastly, the incentives for attendance. The incentives for attendance that the athletic department created included giveaway items, charitable causes, and pre-game and halftime activities. To show this, the quote is, "The knockout stuff during halftime, picking people out of the stands is neat because you get to see your friends go up also." And this was said by a non-student athlete who attended a game. Next, we looked at common interest. And common interest is group dynamics, social networking, and friendships that result from individuals being brought together by a common interest. There was an interesting topic to review because a stakeholder spoke specifically of some of the positive outcomes associated with establishing a sense of community through common interest. First is common interest outside of sport, which was a topic in multiple stakeholder groups by community activities such as church. We have the quote of, "Well, I mean, I go to church, so I guess that's more of a community like the city. So like that's how I come, I guess, like a part of the community with them." And that was said by a non-student athlete. Next, we have common interest in sport. This was very prevalent among all of our groups. It was shown that many people find group dynamics by the common interest of sport. And the quote we have for that is March Madness. It was kind of, I think, it was the perfect storm for our athletic department and our university just to be there and be part of something that is really, besides the Super Bowl, I guess arguably the greatest sporting event, and that we know is March Madness. And then lastly, community outreach was specifically seen as an area of a sense of community that was felt. Most athletic teams at the university participate in community outreach activities, so it was noted that community members saw them there. The quote we have is, "I saw from Meals on Wheels that the men's basketball team had gone there and helped bag lunches and things, and I know that a lot of different sports teams volunteer for Special Olympics because I do as well. And they're always there, the women's basketball team, the men's basketball team, the baseball team, and the soccer team." And this was noted by a community member. Next is competition. Competition is the challenge to excel against both internal and external rivalries. Competition is a topic that was not as salient as the other dimensions. It was only recognized among other student athletes and their stakeholder groups. The quote we have is, "I think about my teammates and the hard work that we put in together and everything that we built together and all the hard work we've done to get this program where it is at now. I mean, a majority of my life revolves around running, basically. Just a lot of time that I've put into it. So to be able to get where I am now and be at this level, when I think of the university and the team, it is like the team that I'm a part of and I represent as I get to run, I guess." And this was said by a student athlete. Next is equity of administrative decisions. Equity of administrative decisions is decisions that demonstrate all community members are treated equal. First, rather if students are student athletes or not, the athletic department staff treats them equally, and this was shown through care for all students. And the quote is, "I don't think it matters whether they're athletes or non-athletes. They are very welcoming, they do a lot." And this was said by a member of the athletic department staff. Next is sense of comfort and how the department shows its equality by creating a comfortable environment. The quote we have is, "I think everyone would feel a sense of safety and comfort because everyone's just there having a good time." And this was spoken by a non-student athlete who had attended a basketball game. And lastly, we have lack of equity. There was evidence of lack of equity by the athletic department between men's and women's sports. Quote is, could they do better? Yes, especially with the women's sports, because obviously the women's sports don't get enough fans or even credit that is there. And this was said by a student athlete who is a female. Next is leadership opportunities. Leadership opportunities is the informal and formal opportunities to guide and direct others in the community. Leadership opportunities is evident in athletes, but recognized by non-athletes and staff. Our stakeholder group of the athletic department staff noted that athletes are seen as role models. The quote we have is, I hate to keep saying it, but it is that hero worship, especially if you're a freshman on campus and they get into class where they, an athlete, are in one. It's a good role model. Next is opportunities for leadership outside of sport. This gives opportunities for athletes to be leaders in their community outside of the sports. The mention that we have is picking up this job at the tutoring center is kind of changes that a little bit, because I do feel a bit more connected now than I did before with working with other students and helping them and stuff. This was said by a student athlete. And lastly is leadership through the lens of members of the athletic department staff and the opportunities that are created for them that wouldn't be otherwise, that they get to represent in the university. The quote we have is, I think being able to representing the department and working with the public and other departments in the university that I wouldn't really encounter otherwise. And this was said by a member of our athletic department staff. Next is social spaces. Social spaces is a common area or facility in which athletes could interact with one another. Social spaces was the most evident factor found through our coding. And being that a rural community was the topic of this research, mentions of a tight-knit and small community were mentioned by all groups. The quote we have is, I think kind of the attitude that we adopted being a Highlander is kind of embracing the world that we have in this community. Smaller, close-knit, all of that. I think just being a part of that. And that was said by a member of the athletic department staff. Next is social spaces that were created through the common area of sporting events. This was seen by both student athletes and non-student athletes alike. The quote we have is, so I think just like basketball here is a big and everything. So when we do stuff around that and everything, I think it is our best way of connecting with people. And this was said by a student athlete that was not a member of the basketball team, but who attended one of the games. Next is social spaces through athletic department events. They were mentioned by multiple stakeholder groups in the form of things such as alumni events. The quote we have for that is, in fact, some of that team that were some of the teams that won some championships, then I looked up to them tremendously and thought, one day I'm going to do that. And so I ended up playing and now we have our alumni weekends and I get to connect with those same people, but on a different level. And this is a quote from a community member who used to be a former female athlete. And lastly, social spaces through the form of community service activities. They were very notable throughout all of our research, and with that, community service activities were an important social space to note. The quote we have is, when the men's team helped with Meals on Wheels, I saw it because I deliver Meals on Wheels and I got the message from them. And this was speaking of when the community member had volunteered and saw members of the basketball team and was actually informed of when the next game was from them through that social space. So the purpose of this research was to discover the feelings of 4 different groups and how they felt about the local rural community through sport. I think that this research shows that there has been success in building a sense of community through community outreach conducted by student athletes. It also shows that people of the local community recognize the athletes through outreach. Therefore, there is room for improvement to participate in more outreach activities. For future research on this topic, I believe it would be more beneficial to interview a wider variety of community members. Depending on how someone is involved in the community shows how they are connected through athletics. So, interviewing more people from different backgrounds would show better results for future research. Thank you.